history does this. There's the presidency you think you're going to have and the presidency that history wants you to have. And 9/11 meant that the George W. Bush presidency was going to be very different from whatever he was thinking it was going to be about.
There is conservative compassion as well as liberal compassion, and so to be fair, we should, it seems to me, turn our attention to the right-wing version of the phenomenon. Compassionate conservatism was a slogan. It was I suppose it aspired to be a public philosophy of the George W. Bush administration. How do you evaluate that? Is that simply conservative BS?
No, I don't think it's, I'd give it a little more credit than that. First of all, some context. There seems to be, for one thing, a genetic component in the Bush family. George H.W. Bush ran for president in 1988, promising a kinder, gentler America. This seemed to be kinder and gentler than whom, people might ask. Well, it seemed to be that someone who had been Ronald Reagan's vice president was saying that he wanted to sand some of the rough edges off of Reaganism. And his son, George W. Bush, announcing his candidacy for president in 1999 after 4 years of Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House, seemed to have made a similar calculation. So the younger Bush introduces to America's political vocabulary compassionate conservatism. I take it to be it was never really fleshed out very either in theory or practice.
But you take it to be more than an electoral
I do,
strategy.
and it seems to be more than the father's kinder and gentler America seemed to rely entirely on volunteerism, the 1,000 points of light. So Americans were to tend to one another's suffering, but to do so non-governmentally. And the reason that George H.W. Bush offered for that stipulation was not very powerful. He said in his inaugural address in 1989, in promoting a kinder, gentler America, that in any case, he said, we have more will than wallet. Unfortunately, there were Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, and they were more than ready to help him. They believe that where there's a will, there's always a wallet. So they did not take this as settling the question. George W. Bush's compassionate conservatism seemed more ambitious and, in a sense, more governmental. It
certainly involved more money.
It involved more money, public money.
Public money.
It, I would say that it was compassionate in that it called upon conservatives to take suffering seriously. In this regard, Bush was acknowledging the grave damage liberal critics had done to the conservative cause with their criticism of Reagan and then of Gingrich as being hard-hearted and mean-spirited and caring only about the rich. George W. Bush felt that it was not politically feasible to run for president without responding to and pushing back against this characterization in some way.
Do you think he was right about that?
Well, as a political calculation, I think it was right. I think that whether it was right on the substance is a different question. But I think that given where the public perceptions were at that time, yes, conservatives had to reply to that somehow. They couldn't simply say, well, no, it's not true, let's move on. Liberals were being too insistent and too effective in that critique. Where compassionate conservatism was conservative was that, and we addressed this earlier, that it made a point of saying that compassion involved not simply addressing suffering, bodily needs kind of suffering, but of uplifting the whole person. So it emphasized that there were ways of living, modes of thinking that were essential to a successful life, to a life well lived, and that it was the business of true compassion to seek to impart those, not simply to feed the hungry, but to treat the suffering, the poor, as moral agents capable, in most cases, of the changes that would turn their lives around. So in its emphasis, for example, on the Office of Faith-Based Programs, it wanted to integrate government welfare state compassion with the agents in the poorest and places in America who are really doing the most to change people's lives. I think that's as far as it goes. I think that there are good things to say about that. We'll never really know what came of it. Because the presidency that history does this. There's the presidency you think you're going to have and the presidency that history wants you to have. And 9/11 meant that the George W. Bush presidency was going to be very different from whatever he was thinking it was going to be about prior to that. By the time he writes his, what amount to his memoirs, I think Decision Points is the name of the book, Compassionate Conservatism does not appear anywhere in it. So that simply drops off. I think that the worst thing you can say, the biggest problem with compassionate conservatism is that it was never really clear why the President of the United States or a political party in the United States needed to be or could be trusted to be the catalyst for this kind of moral change, particularly for a Republican seeking office, talking about limited government, to also at the same time saying that as president, I am going to encourage to find ways that the federal government can make people more provident, more disciplined, to steer them back on the path of right living. How that can be done in a way that is not governmentally intrusive and sort of alarming. This goes back to the kind of the difficulties of the modern bargain. We want the results, but at the same time, I think the notion of limited government means that we are wary about a government that is going to be our sort of moral schoolmaster in this way.